Enjoy the company hoodie and gift card, she said, all stuffy and smug, like her Botox hadn't fully settled and she was struggling to fake basic sympathy. That's the moment I knew exactly what was happening. Brittany, the CEO's nepotism hire dressed in overpriced flats, was firing me in front of the entire company. No warning, no write-up, no quiet request to chat privately, just a bright theatrical performance dropped into the middle of our quarterly all-hands meeting, sandwiched right between the announcement of new snack flavors and the Q3 burn rate update. I stood there with my hands folded, watching her pretend to read from a script she clearly didn't write herself. Hannah has been a treasured part of the Nexora family, she cooed, like she wasn't seconds away from gutting me with a smile plastered on her face. But due to performance misalignment and evolving culture priorities, we've decided to part ways. Then she reached into one of those ridiculous culture crates we usually hand out to interns and pulled out a hoodie, my name scrawled across the tag in Sharpie like I was a lost umbrella. Tucked inside was a $50 gift card to a smoothie shop that doesn't even operate in my zip code. Oh, she added, as if she just remembered. Unfortunately, your Q4 bonus didn't meet the revised KPI rubric, so it won't be issued. Revised KPI rubric. I built the original KPI rubric myself. I could feel about 40 heads turning in slow motion around the room, sales reps tugging awkwardly at their collars, the new intern in front suddenly very interested in her phone. The only person who didn't react at all was our CFO, whose face read something like, "Don't pull me into this, I already bought the boat." So I smiled, that calm, "Don't worry, I'm not going to sue you" smile that makes HR people nervous, somewhere deep in their oat milk souls. I picked up the hoodie like it might be radioactive, held it at arm's length, felt the scratchy polyester judgment of it all. "Thanks for the memories," I said, voice level, almost friendly, not because I wasn't furious, but because rage is for amateurs and I am, above all things, a professional. I walked out without slamming a single door. That part mattered. They wanted a breakdown, something dramatic to circulate through Slack like a meme. I gave them nothing but the quiet click of my heels and the faint smell of vanilla air freshener trying to mask something rotten underneath it. Here's what nobody in that room noticed. HR never had me sign a thing. No exit packet, no NDA reminder, no acknowledgement that my termination was fair and lawful, just a cheerful, pre-written email saying my account would be deactivated by 3 o'clock and wishing me luck in my future endeavors. That's because somewhere in that building, someone knew this wasn't clean. Brittany had been gunning for me since the day she floated into the role of Chief Culture Officer, which really just meant professional brunch attendee with payroll access. She didn't like that I had influence. She hated that I had history. She despised that people actually trusted me. When I flagged some odd entries in the Q2 budget, $18,000 labeled wellness experiences that mysteriously lined up with her bachelorette trip to Palm Springs, HR told me to focus on forward momentum instead. And now, here we were. I walked past the glass-walled offices where executives suddenly found their screens fascinating, past the break room where someone was slicing a cake for another quarter of made-up success, past the front desk where the office manager gave me a pity smile like I had some kind of terminal illness. Outside, the sky was an obnoxious shade of cheerful blue, completely indifferent to what had just happened. I sat in my car staring at the hoodie, then popped the trunk, tossed it in, and pulled out my personal laptop, the one that had never once touched the company Wi-Fi, the one holding a very specific file on a very specific encrypted partition. The file was named Clause 12.7b Trigger PDF, because Brittany may have just fired me, but she had no idea she'd just handed over the keys to the entire tech stack. 3 weeks before that hoodie ever hit the fan, I was sitting in a booth at a bar that smelled like stale fries and cheap secrets. Laptop open, a glass of Pinot teetering dangerously close to the edge. Across from me sat my actual attorney, not the corporate placeholder lawyers wheel out when someone needs to feel heard, but a real one. Diane, mid-40s, sharp as broken glass, wearing pearls like brass knuckles. She leaned over my screen and let out a low whistle. "You sure about this, Hannah?" she asked. I took a sip of wine and nodded. "They've treated me like an employee this whole time, but I've operated like an owner. It's time I bought some insurance." That insurance was a licensing clause buried so deep in our vendor consolidation contract, it practically wore camouflage. While everyone else obsessed over flashy UX redesigns and shiny new sales funnel integrations, I had spent 6 months quietly untangling our backend, rebuilding the company's entire operational spine. The problem was that spine had never been proprietary. We'd been duct taping together third-party tools for years, so I rebuilt it from scratch, clean, secure, scalable, and routed the whole thing through my own LLC, an entity that had technically sat on our vendor ledger for years under the label Ops Architecture and Platform Integration. Nobody noticed when the invoicing shifted slightly. Nobody blinked when I submitted a statement of work that quietly redirected licensing rights to my LLC instead of the company. And nobody, especially not Brittany, ever bothered reading the legal language about revocation of rights upon improper dismissal of key personnel. It slid through legal like a lukewarm whisper in a long meeting, stamped, filed, forgotten. The clause was elegantly simple. If the company terminated me without a formal documented review and cause, the perpetual license would self-revoke instantly. No lawsuit needed, no messy arbitration, just lights out. Petty, maybe. Legal, absolutely. Visible to anyone not looking under a microscope. Not even slightly. Brittany never suspected a thing. Far too busy optimizing culture through wellness initiatives and Slack emojis. The very day I finalized that contract, she was filming an Instagram live about her morning gratitude ritual while I was quietly purchasing the digital equivalent of a detonator. I tested the clause first in a sandbox repo, ran it through simulations with outside counsel, no red flags anywhere. Every signature clean, even compliance logged it into the licensing repository, like just another routine vendor entry. That's the thing about staying quiet, people assume you're harmless. They forget the quiet ones are usually the architects of the walls everyone else is standing on. I printed exactly one copy and locked it in a fireproof safe in my attic, right beside my grandmother's will and my car's title. The digital copy was encrypted with 2 backups, one tucked away on a secure server in Iceland, the other hidden inside a lipstick case in my desk drawer. For the record, I didn't actually want to use it. I liked my job. I didn't love the politics, the nepotism, or the way Brittany treated vendor invoices like her personal ATM, but I loved the systems, the people, the building of things. Still, every time she flashed those veneers and called me Hannah Banana in meetings like I was her emotional support employee, I felt that trigger twitch a little harder. And the day I caught her quietly deleting Slack messages about a budget reallocation, I knew the countdown had officially begun. Clauses like 12.7b are quiet bombs. Nobody hears the ticking until it's far too late. And the best part was that it wasn't buried in legal jargon or hidden behind an NDA. It sat right there in plain English, one paragraph titled, Reversion of Use License Upon Improper Termination, practically begging to be read by anyone paying attention. So when HR slid me that $50 smoothie card and a generic hoodie and announced we're streamlining operations, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just smiled and thought, activate the clause. Brittany had drifted into Nexora like she'd been airlifted straight off a lifestyle influencer's mood board, designer tote bag, daily affirmations, and the swagger of someone who'd never sat through a single performance review in her life. No resume worth mentioning, no track record, just a press release crowning her chief culture officer, a title with all the authority and none of the accountability. Nepotism royalty wrapped in pastel blazers and buzzwords, she took over the second floor with scented candles and framed quotes about radical alignment. And then she set her sights on me. It started small. My monthly ops reports kept mysteriously disappearing from meeting agendas. My name got quietly dropped from key Slack threads. Budget approvals started routing through new culture committees suspiciously stacked with her yoga friends. I'd walk into strategy meetings and find my chair missing, literally wheeled out into the hallway. Brittany never confronted anyone directly. That would have required a spine. Instead, her weapons were passive aggression and vague corporate buzzwords, wielded like a toddler armed with glitter glue. Raise a concern in a meeting, and she'd say, let's reframe that energy. Or worse, I think Hannah's perspective comes from a scarcity mindset. Scarcity mindset, while I was the one keeping the company financially solvent, and she was billing $900 for a team connection ceremony that turned out to be a drum circle in the break room. The motive was obvious. My competence made her insecure, a mirror she simply couldn't shatter. Every time I gently pointed out a flaw in one of her initiatives, like the employee empowerment stipend that turned out to be a Venmo transfer to her college roommate for motivational stickers, she'd flash that tight little smile and say something like, Hannah brings such an important legacy lens to things. Legacy lens. Like I was an old fax machine that somehow still functioned. So I started documenting everything. Every deleted Slack message, every accidental double payment to her wellness vendors, every payroll oddity, especially the $4,200 that went out to someone listed as an emotional environment consultant who, upon closer inspection, turned out to be a DJ from a music festival. I built folders, color-coded, time-stamped, backed up across 2 separate cloud drives under disguised project names. I even recorded a call where she described layoffs as emotional recalibrations and suggested softening the blow with succulence. Still, I didn't escalate, not yet. HR eventually invited me to mediation, just a quick sit-down with Brittany, they chirped, to realign communication styles. I gave them my biggest smile, the kind that makes HR sweat. Oh, I'm aligned, I told them. I'm just not compatible with delusion. Brittany never wanted alignment, she wanted erasure, and I could watch it happening in real time. The way she slowly rewrote my contributions as her own PR victories. On the company blog, she talked about streamlining our vendor architecture as if she'd personally renegotiated the fulfillment contracts. She even started taking credit for the very platform that my claws would soon snap shut on her, like a mousetrap closing on a perfectly manicured finger. One afternoon, she strolled past my desk, phone to her ear, announcing loudly, "Yeah, Hannah's great at keeping the trains running, but it's time for conductors who actually know where we're headed." I stared at my screen, smiling so hard my jaw ached because the train she thought she was driving was speeding straight toward a cliff, and I happened to own the deed to the tracks. It was 11:42 on a Tuesday night when I finally found it. I'd been digging through the Q4 bonus allocation ledger because something smelled off, like fruit rotting quietly behind a cabinet door. We were under budget, yet performance bonuses kept coming up short, very short, the kind of short that screams, "We value you in theory, but not enough to actually pay you." I cross-referenced the raw disbursement logs against payroll, then against project closeout reports, and there it was, a series of Venmo transfers labeled Event Coordination Ops Celebration, totaling $18,750, recipient Brittany Loves Balance. I blinked, thinking maybe this was some placeholder name for a vendor onboarded through a personal account, weird but not unheard of. I pulled the vendor invoice ID, nothing in the vendor system, nothing logged in our accounting software, just a single line item with a fake vendor code and a timestamp 3 days before our Q4 bonus notifications were conveniently delayed for compliance review. I dug through the finance system's audit trail, tracked the approval flow, and there it was. Brittany had manually overridden the bonus allocations meant for operations, diverted the funds into a fabricated event, and quietly transferred the money to herself, labeled neatly as an employee enrichment initiative. An initiative whose sole employee enriched happened to be Brittany. Classic. I printed the report, never emailed it, never saved it to the company cloud, just printed it and held it under my kitchen light like evidence of something dead and rotting. I didn't act immediately, didn't call legal, didn't fire off some dramatic email or post a meltdown in Slack like a rookie. Instead, I slid it into a folder labeled Petty Cash and Petty Queens and tucked it on my bookshelf beside my old grad school textbooks, letting it sit because I already knew the blade was coming. This just confirmed it was freshly sharpened. The very next morning, I got pulled into a quick sync with HR. The office smelled like lavender and cowardice. Brittany was already seated, sipping an oat milk latte like she'd somehow earned it. The HR rep, a woman named Paige who looked like she'd aged 3 years overnight, cleared her throat and read from a printed statement, which told me instantly that legal either hadn't reviewed it or wanted nothing to do with it. "Hannah, we've noticed a pattern of interpersonal friction and sustained negativity that's beginning to affect culture here at Nexora," she read. "As a result, leadership has decided to move in a different direction." Brittany nodded solemnly, as though we were attending a funeral for my career. "I know this is hard," she added, crocodile tears barely forming, "but sometimes a fresh start is a blessing in disguise." I stared at her for a full 5 seconds, just long enough to make her squirm in her ergonomic chair. Then I stood up. No protest, no scene, total calm. "Do I need to sign anything?" I asked Paige. She panicked slightly. We'll follow up with a digital exit packet, no immediate signature required." Good. That confirmed they'd skipped the proper process entirely. No documentation, no cause, no formal review, just negativity, that vague, cowardly catch-all phrase you reach for when the real reason wouldn't survive an arbitration hearing. I walked out slower this time, not from sadness, just control, like a queen exiting a burning palace at her own pace. Back in my car, I opened my laptop, tethered to my phone's hotspot, and dragged 2 files into an encrypted folder. The first, the bonus theft report. The second, the clause trigger document. I emailed the first straight to Diane. Subject line, Brittany's retirement fund. I uploaded the second to a private Git repository under my LLC's account, a version-controlled time bomb with IP ownership already authenticated and notarized. No need for a dramatic monologue, just cold documentation and a clock quietly counting down. Ghosting a company isn't anything like ghosting an ex. With an ex, you delete the photos, block the number, maybe cry into a pint of ice cream that tastes like betrayal and freezer burn. With a company, it's cleaner, more surgical. You simply wipe your fingerprints off the glass and let their own mess come slowly into focus on its own. I didn't update LinkedIn, didn't post some falsely upbeat onward and upward farewell with emojis and a coffee shop selfie. No angry rant, no cryptic subtweets. I just vanished. And nothing rattles a toxic workplace quite like silence. I didn't even reach out to the engineers I used to mentor. The junior project manager who used to ask me if her roadmap made sense messaged me once. I left it on red. She'll figure it out, or she won't. Not my circus anymore. Behind the scenes, a private equity firm called Crestaline Capital had begun due diligence for the company's Series B round. $50 million on the table. And suddenly every spreadsheet, every process map, every vendor agreement I'd ever touched was under a magnifying glass. Except now there was no me left to explain any of it. No one to decode why a particular vendor had a 72-hour lead time unless you bribe them with cookies. No one to untangle the invoice routing maze I'd built specifically to prevent fraud. And ironically, to contain Brittany. I watched from a distance, dry-eyed, coffee in hand. First, the finance team sent out a revenue projection that was off by $1.3 million, blaming software API delays, when the real issue was simpler. They'd never learned the two-step audit process I built because I never handed them the playbook. Not out of spite, out of experience. You don't hand blueprints to the people building your guillotine. Then the tech side started unraveling. 3 microservices collapsed at once. The outside contractor Brittany insisted on hiring. After one shared vision board session, couldn't troubleshoot any of it because the back-end schema followed my naming conventions. Not his, all thoroughly documented, just in my LLC's repository, not the company's. The clause made sure of that. Brittany, predictably, launched a full communication offensive. In a weekly leadership video, she called it a growth recalibration phase and claimed the team was reclaiming operational sovereignty, which is corporate code for we have absolutely no idea what we're doing, but we're going to brand it like a wellness retreat anyway. Meanwhile, KPIs slid like ice on tile. Vendor service agreements got missed, onboarding timelines doubled, customers started complaining publicly, and trust began leaking out the cracks. Brittany blamed culture resistance, insisting the team simply wasn't willing to step fully into the new vision, all while wearing a sweatshirt that read, "Do the work," which made me actually choke on my coffee. HR tried damage control, calling it a legacy architecture issue, but legacy architecture wasn't the real problem. I was the architecture, and they'd torn it out without ever checking the blueprints. Every missed deadline became a crack. Every investor question about back-end reliability landed like a sledgehammer. And every time Brittany opened her mouth in public, she packed a little more dynamite into the foundation of her father's company. Crestline's analysts weren't fools. They asked pointed questions. And when the answers came back vague, contradictory, or bounced between 3 departments with no clear owner, they started highlighting things. Literally. Yellow highlighter across every missing process document, every unfinished integration, every contract referencing tools the company no longer had access to. I imagine that boardroom smelled like tension and sugar-free energy drinks. Meanwhile, I was baking banana bread. That's honestly what I remember most about that week. The quiet hum of my stand mixer, sunlight slanting sideways through my kitchen window around 3 in the afternoon, and how